"Do not close your eyes," the Alpha King whispered, his voice breaking beneath the weight of a fear no ruler should ever reveal. "Please stay with me." Rain fell in steady sheets across the ancient forest, soaking the royal cloak spread beneath Abigail Hayes as King Lucas Ashford knelt beside her, one trembling hand supporting her shoulders while the other desperately searched for any sign that she was still fighting to breathe. The palace healers surrounded them in anxious silence, their medicine bags scattered across the damp ground, yet no one dared interrupt the king. For 7 endless months, Lucas had carried hope through every sunrise and every sleepless night, believing kindness, patience, and unwavering devotion could keep one fragile life from slipping away. Now, as thunder rolled above the towering pines, that hope seemed frighteningly small. Abigail's pale face rested against his arm, strands of chestnut hair clinging to her rain-soaked skin, her breathing so faint that each shallow breath felt like a miracle borrowed from time itself. One healer carefully reached toward her wrist before lowering his eyes with quiet uncertainty. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "she still hears you. Sometimes the heart listens even when the body cannot answer." Lucas leaned closer, brushing damp leaves away from Abigail's face with remarkable tenderness. He remembered every smile she had ever given him, every gentle laugh that had somehow filled the vast halls of Blackwood Castle with warmth no roaring fireplace could ever match. The thought that those moments might become memories instead of promises tightened around his heart until even breathing became difficult. Around them, the forest stood silent except for falling rain and distant wind moving through ancient branches, as though nature itself waited beside the king. No royal ceremony had ever frightened Lucas. No rival alpha had ever shaken his confidence. Yet losing the quiet Omega resting in his arms terrified him more than every battle he had avoided throughout his reign. He closed his eyes for only a heartbeat before speaking again, softer this time, almost as though he feared the rain might carry his words away before they reached her. "You once told me every life deserves someone who refuses to give up," he whispered. "Now it is my turn to refuse." His voice faded into the storm as another healer carefully adjusted the warm blankets wrapped around Abigail's shoulders. Then something almost too small to notice happened. Her fingers moved, only slightly, only enough to brush against the sleeve of Lucas's coat. But the tiny movement froze everyone where they stood. Lucas immediately looked down, hope returning to his silver eyes with painful intensity. Abigail did not wake. She did not speak. Yet her hand remained resting lightly against him, as though some hidden part of her still recognized the one person who had never stopped believing she would survive. Tears Lucas had spent months refusing finally gathered in his eyes, though none were allowed to fall. He gently held her hand between both of his, protecting it from the cold as though it were the most precious treasure in the kingdom. Watching them together, the oldest healer quietly stepped back and lowered his head, understanding something the others had not yet seen. Whatever bound the Alpha King and the young Omega together had become stronger than medicine alone. Long before this desperate night beneath the storm, long before the palace, the laughter, or the countless days spent beside one another, destiny had already begun writing a story neither of them understood. And as Lucas held Abigail close, refusing to surrender to fear, his mind drifted back to the snow-covered forest where 7 months earlier he had first discovered the mysterious young woman lying alone beneath the frozen branches, unaware that carrying her home would forever change both of their lives. 7 months earlier, winter had wrapped the Blackwood forest beneath a blanket of untouched snow, turning every towering pine into a silent guardian standing beneath a pale gray sky. King Lucas Ashford had chosen to ride beyond the kingdom's borders without the usual royal procession, accompanied only by 2 trusted guards who understood his habit of visiting the outer territories whenever the first heavy snowfall arrived. He believed a king should see the condition of his land with his own eyes instead of relying only on written reports. The cold wind carried the scent of cedar and fresh snow as his horse slowed unexpectedly near an ancient oak whose massive roots disappeared beneath the frozen ground. The animal refused to take another step. Lucas gently placed one hand against its neck before following its uneasy gaze toward a cluster of low branches covered with white frost. At first he saw nothing except scattered leaves trapped beneath the snow. Then a single strand of chestnut hair caught the winter light. Without hesitation, Lucas stepped from his horse and crossed the untouched snow, his boots sinking several inches with every step. As he pushed aside the heavy branches, he stopped completely. A young woman lay curled against the base of the ancient tree, her cream-colored dress nearly hidden beneath drifting snow, her forest green cloak torn and frozen stiff from the bitter cold. Her face was remarkably peaceful despite the harsh surroundings, as though exhaustion had quietly claimed her long before winter ever could. One of the guards hurried forward before kneeling beside her. "Your Majesty," he said carefully after checking for signs of life. "She is still breathing, but only barely." Lucas removed his heavy royal cloak without a second thought and gently wrapped it around the young woman. The warmth disappeared from his own shoulders, but he paid it no attention. He carefully lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, as though weeks of hardship had quietly stolen her strength. For one brief moment, her eyelashes fluttered. Her pale blue eyes opened only halfway before meeting his silver gaze. Confusion lingered there, mixed with quiet fear and overwhelming exhaustion. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound escaped. Then she lost consciousness once more, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Lucas looked down at the stranger with an expression his guards had never seen before. It was not pity. It was not curiosity. It was an instinctive determination that appeared long before reason could question it. "We are taking her home," he said calmly. One guard hesitated. "Your Majesty, we do not know who she is. She could belong to another territory." Lucas adjusted the cloak more securely around her before answering. "At this moment, she belongs to no danger while she is under my protection." The journey back to Blackwood Castle lasted nearly 4 hours through steadily falling snow. Lucas refused every suggestion to hand the unconscious woman to another rider, carrying her himself the entire way despite the freezing wind. By the time the castle gates finally opened, servants and royal healers rushed into the courtyard in surprise. No one questioned the king's orders as he carried the mysterious young woman directly into the warmest guest chamber inside the palace. As the healers carefully examined her condition, they discovered no family crest, no identifying papers, and no explanation for how she had reached the deepest part of the forbidden forest alone. The only clue rested quietly beneath the collar of her dress, where a delicate silver pendant engraved with an unfamiliar moon-shaped symbol shimmered softly in the firelight, unnoticed by everyone except the oldest healer, whose expression suddenly grew thoughtful as memories from long-forgotten legends stirred silently within his mind. The royal guest chamber remained quiet except for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the steady rhythm of winter wind brushing against the tall castle windows. For 3 days and 3 nights, Abigail Hayes never opened her eyes. The palace healers worked tirelessly, preparing warm herbal infusions, carefully lowering her fever, and changing fresh blankets whenever the cold threatened to return to her fragile body. Every remedy known throughout the Northern Territories had been placed within arm's reach, yet the oldest healer admitted with gentle honesty that medicine alone could not determine whether she would awaken. Sometimes, he explained, the heart needed a reason to return before the body could truly heal. King Lucas Ashford listened without speaking. From that evening forward, he quietly changed his daily routine. Before attending council meetings each morning, he visited Abigail's room to make certain the fire still burned warmly. After every royal audience, he returned to ask the healers how her condition had changed. Long after the castle had fallen asleep, servants passing through the eastern corridor often noticed the king sitting beside her bed reading reports by candlelight, refusing to leave completely even when duty called elsewhere. At first, everyone assumed he simply felt responsible for the stranger he had rescued from the forest. Yet as the days passed, even the palace staff began noticing small acts of kindness that no royal obligation required. Lucas personally adjusted the curtains whenever harsh afternoon sunlight reached her face. He replaced fading flowers with fresh winter blossoms gathered from the castle greenhouse because one elderly gardener claimed peaceful surroundings sometimes comforted unconscious patients. When the healers prepared warm broth, Lucas patiently held the cup while they carefully helped Abigail swallow a few small sips. None of those gestures seemed extraordinary by themselves, but together they revealed a quiet devotion that surprised everyone who witnessed it. One snowy evening, the oldest healer entered the room carrying another tray of herbs before finding Lucas sitting beside the bed with an open book resting across his lap. "Your Majesty," the healer said gently, "you have not slept properly for several nights." Lucas closed the book without looking away from Abigail. "If she wakes during the night, I do not want her first moment to be spent alone." The old man studied the king for a long moment before smiling faintly. "Compassion has always been your greatest strength. Just remember that even the strongest heart cannot carry every burden by itself." Lucas nodded politely, though neither man believed he would follow that advice. Outside, snow continued falling across Blackwood Castle, transforming the gardens into fields of shimmering white beneath the moonlight. Inside the warm chamber, Abigail remained peaceful, her breathing steadier than before, but still frighteningly delicate. During the early hours of the fourth morning, while the first golden rays of sunrise slowly brightened the horizon, Lucas reached to replace the cool cloth resting across her forehead. Before his hand could move away, slender fingers unexpectedly wrapped around his wrist. The touch lasted only a moment, barely stronger than the movement of a falling feather, yet it stopped him completely. Abigail's eyelashes trembled softly before her pale blue eyes opened just enough to search the unfamiliar room. Confusion crossed her expression as she struggled to focus. Her gaze finally settled upon the man sitting quietly beside her. Their eyes met in complete silence. Lucas offered the smallest reassuring smile, careful not to overwhelm her. "You are safe," he said gently. "You are inside Blackwood Castle." Abigail stared at him for another heartbeat before her dry lips parted with visible effort. Only two faint words escaped before exhaustion claimed her once again. "Thank you." Then she drifted back into peaceful sleep, still holding his wrist lightly in her hand, while Lucas remained perfectly still, unaware that those two simple words would become the beginning of a story neither of them had ever imagined. When Abigail opened her eyes again, winter sunlight spilled gently across the wooden floor, filling the royal chamber with a warmth she had almost forgotten existed. For several quiet moments, she simply listened to the soft crackling of the fireplace, the distant songs of morning birds beyond the frosted windows, and the peaceful rhythm of a castle beginning another day. She could not remember how she had arrived there. Fragments of memory drifted through her mind like snow carried by the wind, impossible to hold long enough to understand. A forest, endless cold, running towards something she could no longer see. Then nothing. As she slowly tried to sit upright, dizziness swept over her, and before she could lose her balance, a calm voice reached her from across the room. "Please do not rush. Your body is still recovering." Abigail turned toward the sound. King Lucas Ashford had been standing beside the window reading official correspondence, yet the moment he noticed her awake, he quietly placed every document aside without hesitation. He approached slowly, making certain his presence felt reassuring, rather than overwhelming. "Good morning," he said with a gentle smile. "You have been asleep for several days." Abigail searched his face, surprised by the kindness in the eyes of a man whose bearing clearly revealed both authority and responsibility. "You found me," she whispered. Lucas nodded. "In the forest during the first heavy snowfall." She lowered her gaze, trying desperately to remember what had happened before that moment, but every attempt left only empty silence inside her mind. "I remember my name," she said quietly. "Abigail Hayes." Her expression became uncertain. "Everything else feels far away." Lucas showed no disappointment. "Then your name is enough for today? The rest can return whenever your heart is ready." Those simple words eased a fear Abigail had not even realized she carried. She had expected questions she could not answer. Instead, she found patience. Over the following days her strength slowly returned. She could walk through the castle corridors with the help of one of the palace healers and eventually insisted on helping prepare simple herbal mixtures rather than remaining in bed. The older healer smiled knowingly as she organized medicine cabinets with remarkable skill, measuring dried herbs almost entirely by instinct despite remembering almost nothing else. "Your hands remember what your mind has forgotten," one elderly healer observed. Abigail looked down at the neatly arranged bundles of lavender and mint before smiling softly. "Perhaps kindness is difficult to forget." Word quietly spread throughout Blackwood Castle that the mysterious young woman rescued from the forest had begun assisting inside the infirmary. Servants found themselves lingering a little longer whenever she greeted them with genuine warmth. Young apprentices gained confidence because she praised every small improvement instead of criticizing mistakes. Even children visiting injured relatives somehow left smiling after spending only a few minutes beside her. Lucas noticed every change. Each morning, while crossing the courtyard toward council meetings, he found himself looking toward the infirmary windows without consciously deciding to do so. Sometimes he caught sight of Abigail laughing gently with elderly patients. Other times, she carefully watered the flowers resting beside each bed, believing beautiful things helped people recover more quickly. One afternoon, while delivering newly requested medical supplies himself, Lucas paused outside the open doorway. Abigail was kneeling beside an elderly woman, carefully wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders before offering a cup of fresh herbal tea. She spoke so softly that Lucas could not hear every word, but he saw the older woman's worried expression gradually become peaceful. For reasons he could not explain, watching Abigail comfort a complete stranger filled him with quiet admiration unlike anything he had experienced before. At that very moment, the oldest healer observed the king standing silently in the hallway and smiled to himself, realizing that while everyone believed they were nursing one fragile young woman back to health, something equally remarkable had already begun healing inside the heart of the Alpha King himself. As winter slowly surrendered to the first gentle signs of spring, Blackwood Castle felt different in ways no one could fully explain. The stone corridors still echoed with the footsteps of guards. The council still debated matters of trade and diplomacy, and servants continued their daily routines with practiced precision. Yet laughter, once rare inside the ancient walls, now appeared almost every afternoon. Abigail Hayes had never intended to change the atmosphere of the castle. She simply greeted every person she met with genuine warmth, remembered the names of kitchen apprentices after hearing them only once, and quietly carried baskets of fresh herbs through the infirmary while humming melodies that seemed older than memory itself. Even those who arrived worried or exhausted often left smiling without realizing exactly why. Lucas noticed the change long before anyone mentioned it aloud. One morning, while walking toward the council chamber, he found several orphaned children gathered in the palace gardens around Abigail, as she patiently showed them how tiny green shoots were pushing through the thawing soil. "Every flower begins where no one expects beauty to grow," she told them gently. One little girl looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Even after winter?" Abigail smiled. "Especially after winter." Lucas remained standing beneath a nearby stone archway, watching without interrupting. He had spent years believing strength alone held a kingdom together. Now he quietly wondered whether kindness accomplished something strength never could. As the weeks passed, Abigail gradually became part of everyday life within the castle. She helped the elderly healer organize shelves that had remained untouched for years, prepared calming herbal tea for nervous messengers before difficult journeys, and spent evenings reading stories to children whose parents served in distant villages. She never sought recognition for any of it. When thanked, she simply answered that caring for others made each day feel worthwhile. Lucas found himself creating small reasons to visit the infirmary more often than necessary. Sometimes he delivered supplies the servants could easily have carried themselves. Other times he claimed to be checking on the progress of palace renovations, though the construction happened nowhere near the healing rooms. Abigail never questioned his unexpected visits. Instead, she welcomed him with the same quiet smile she offered everyone else, asking whether he had remembered to eat lunch or whether another long council meeting had left him tired. No one had asked him simple questions like those in many years. One cool evening, as golden sunlight faded beyond the castle walls, Lucas discovered Abigail carefully replacing wilted flowers in the windows overlooking the courtyard. "You always choose fresh flowers," he observed. She glanced toward him before gently arranging another small bouquet inside a clay vase. People heal more easily when they are reminded that life continues growing. Lucas stepped beside her, looking across the gardens where the first blossoms of spring had begun to appear. "You speak as though hope is something people can plant." Abigail's smile became thoughtful. "Perhaps it is. Sometimes hope begins with something as small as one person deciding, another life is worth saving. Her words settled quietly between them. She had spoken without realizing how deeply they reached him. Lucas looked at her for a long moment before asking the question that had lingered in his thoughts for weeks. Do you remember anything more about the forest? Abigail slowly shook her head. Only fragments. Snow, wind, and a feeling that I was searching for someone before everything became dark. She touched the small silver pendant resting against her collarbone, its unfamiliar moon-shaped symbol catching the evening light. I still do not know why this feels important. Lucas followed her gaze toward the pendant. Before he could answer, the oldest healer quietly entered the room, carrying several ancient books. His eyes lingered on the silver symbol before his expression subtly changed. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I believe it may be time for us to visit the place where you first found Miss Hayes. There are some questions that can only be answered by returning to where this story truly began. The following morning, a soft mist drifted between the towering pines as King Lucas Ashford, Abigail Hayes, and the oldest healer returned to the forgotten corner of Blackwood Forest where fate had quietly crossed their paths 7 months earlier. Spring had transformed the landscape completely. The heavy snow had disappeared, replaced by carpets of emerald moss, delicate wildflowers, and streams of crystal-clear water flowing between ancient roots. Abigail walked slowly beside Lucas, her fingers resting lightly against the silver pendant hanging from her neck. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the stronger and unfamiliar feeling settled inside her chest. It was neither fear nor sadness. It felt like recognition waiting patiently beyond memory. When they finally reached the enormous oak tree where Lucas had first found her, Abigail stopped without saying a word. Her breathing became uneven as fragments of forgotten images flashed across her mind. Moonlight shining through frozen branches. The sound of distant voices. A promise spoken by someone whose face she could no longer remember. She instinctively reached toward the rough bark of the ancient tree, and the moment her fingertips touched its surface, the silver pendant around her neck began reflecting sunlight with unusual brilliance. Lucas noticed the change immediately. Are you all right? He asked softly. Abigail closed her eyes for a moment before nodding slowly. This place feels familiar, not because I remember it with my mind, but because my heart does. The oldest healer quietly opened one of the weathered books he had carried from the castle library. Inside, faded illustrations depicted the very same moon-shaped symbol engraved upon Abigail's pendant. I suspected this might be true, he said gently. Long before Blackwood Castle was built, this forest was known as the Valley of the First Bond. According to ancient records, destiny sometimes revealed itself here before either soul understood what it meant. Lucas looked from the illustration to Abigail's pendant with growing curiosity. You believe this symbol is connected to us? The healer smiled kindly. I believe it is connected to a choice, not a command. Ancient bonds were never chains. They simply guided two hearts toward the possibility of walking the same path. Abigail listened quietly, still resting one hand against the old oak. Suddenly, another memory surfaced, clearer than the others. She saw herself wandering through endless snow while clutching the pendant close to her heart. She remembered collapsing beneath these very branches after whispering one final prayer that someone, anyone, would find her before hope disappeared completely. Her eyes slowly filled with tears, not from grief, but from overwhelming gratitude. She turned toward Lucas. I remember one thing now. His expression remained calm and patient. What is it? Abigail smiled gently through trembling emotion. Before everything became dark, I wished for one more chance to live. Lucas looked at her for a long silent moment before answering with complete honesty. And the day I found you, I believed I was simply rescuing a stranger. He lowered his gaze briefly before smiling with quiet warmth. Now I think perhaps you rescued something inside me as well. Neither of them noticed the oldest healer quietly stepping away, allowing the forest to surround them with peaceful silence. Birds sang high among the branches, sunlight danced across fresh spring leaves, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the ancient clearing. Abigail looked toward the path leading back to the castle before softly reaching for Lucas's hand of her own free will. He accepted the gesture without surprise, without expectation, only with quiet gratitude. As their hands met beneath the old oak tree, the silver pendant reflected one final beam of golden light. And for the first time since awakening inside Blackwood Castle, Abigail realized she no longer wanted to spend her life searching for the past she had lost. She wanted to build a future beside the man who had never stopped believing her life was worth saving. And Lucas understood that the greatest gift destiny had given him was never the chance to become her hero, but the privilege of watching her choose life, hope, and love for herself. Several peaceful weeks passed after their journey to the ancient oak, and although neither Lucas nor Abigail spoke openly about what had begun to grow between them, everyone inside Blackwood Castle quietly noticed the change. The Alpha King no longer hurried through every meal alone. Instead, he often stopped by the infirmary to share tea with Abigail after the day's work had ended. Their conversations were never grand or dramatic. They spoke about the children learning to grow herbs in the palace gardens, the arrival of migrating birds returning with spring, and the old stories hidden inside forgotten books. Somehow those ordinary moments became the happiest part of each day. Abigail found herself laughing more freely than she could ever remember. Lucas found himself looking forward to sunrise, knowing another morning meant another chance to hear her gentle voice echo through the castle halls. One afternoon, the oldest healer approached them while they organized fresh herbs inside the greenhouse. "There is someone I believe you should meet," he said with a quiet smile. He guided them to a small stone sanctuary nestled deep within the royal gardens wherein elderly priestess waited beside a circular fountain carved with moon symbols older than the kingdom itself. Her silver hair shimmered beneath the afternoon sunlight, and her kind eyes seemed to recognize both of them before either had spoken a word. As Abigail stepped closer, the silver pendant resting against her collarbone reflected a soft glow across the surface of the fountain. The priestess smiled warmly. "The moon remembers promises even when people forget them." Lucas exchanged a curious glance with Abigail before asking gently, "What does that mean?" The priestess reached into the clear water and lifted a smooth white stone engraved with the same moon-shaped symbol. Long ago, before titles and crowns mattered, two souls who freely chose kindness above power were blessed with a bond that could never be forced. It awakened only when both hearts learned to love without expecting anything in return. She looked directly at Abigail. "You were never brought to this kingdom by accident." Then she turned toward Lucas. "And you did not save her because destiny demanded it. You saved her because compassion guided your choice." That is why the bond answered. Abigail lowered her eyes as quiet understanding settled inside her heart. Every act of patience Lucas had shown her had been freely given. Every smile she offered in return had come without obligation. Nothing between them had ever been built upon duty alone. The priestess gently placed the white stone into Abigail's hands before continuing. "The ancient bond is not a reward. It is an invitation. Each day you must still choose one another." Lucas smiled softly. "Then I would gladly make that choice every morning for the rest of my life." Abigail looked up, surprised by the quiet certainty in his voice. There was no royal command behind those words, no expectation that she owed him anything because he had rescued her. There was only honesty. A feeling of peace spread through her so naturally that it almost felt as though her heart had finally returned home. She stepped closer and met his silver eyes without hesitation. "When I woke inside the castle, I believed you had given me another chance to live," she said. Gently. "Now I understand you also gave me the freedom to choose how I wanted to live." Lucas reached for her hand slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished. Instead, Abigail placed her hand willingly in his, smiling with quiet confidence. Around them the garden seemed brighter than before as warm spring sunlight danced across blooming flowers, and gentle birdsong filled the peaceful afternoon. Watching from a respectful distance, the oldest healer and the priestess exchanged knowing smiles, for they understood something the young couple had only just begun to discover. The strongest promise in the world was never written by fate alone. It was renewed every single day by two hearts choosing kindness, trust, and love over fear. The arrival of summer brought visitors from every allied territory to Blackwood Castle for the annual Council of the Northern Pacts, a gathering where leaders discussed peace, trade, and the future of their people. The great hall shimmered beneath banners representing every pack, while long wooden tables overflowed with fresh bread, fruit, and flowers gathered from the royal gardens Abigail had helped restore during the spring. Although the atmosphere appeared welcoming, Lucas understood that not every guest had come simply to celebrate. Some influential nobles had already begun questioning why an unknown Omega with no remembered family history had become such an important presence beside the Alpha King. During the opening council session, one elderly lord respectfully rose from his seat. His voice remained calm, but his words carried quiet doubt. "Your Majesty, your compassion honors this kingdom. However, many wonder whether trusting a woman whose past remains unknown is wise for the future of Blackwood." The great hall fell completely silent. Abigail lowered her eyes, not because she felt ashamed, but because she had never wanted to become the reason anyone questioned Lucas's judgment. Before she could speak, Lucas calmly stood from his chair. His expression held neither anger nor defensiveness. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that immediately commanded the room's attention. "When I found Abigail," he began, "she possessed no title, no wealth, and no explanation for how she came to our forest. What she did possess was a heart that chose kindness every single day despite having every reason to fear the world around her." His gaze slowly moved across the assembled leaders. "In the months since then, she has asked for nothing from this kingdom. She has cared for our children, comforted our elderly, strengthened our healers, and reminded every person inside these walls that compassion is not weakness. If character is measured by actions, then few among us have earned greater respect." The room remained quiet as Lucas turned toward Abigail with a warm smile. A person's value is never determined by the memories they have lost. It is revealed by the choices they continue to make. Abigail felt tears gathering in her eyes, not because she needed someone to defend her, but because Lucas had spoken with complete sincerity, never mentioning destiny, ancient bonds, or the mysterious pendant around her neck. He had chosen to stand beside her simply because he believed in the person she had become. Slowly, the elderly lord who had first spoken placed one hand over his heart. "Then I owe Miss Hayes an apology," he said with genuine humility. "I judged uncertainty instead of character." One by one, the other visiting leaders nodded in quiet agreement. The atmosphere inside the hall softened as conversation gradually returned, no longer centered upon doubt, but upon admiration for the courage both Lucas and Abigail had quietly demonstrated. Later that evening, after the council had ended, Abigail and Lucas walked together through the peaceful palace gardens beneath a sky filled with countless stars. Warm lanterns illuminated the winding stone paths while the scent of blooming roses drifted through the gentle summer air. Abigail stopped beside the fountain where they had first met the priestess. "You could have explained everything about the ancient bond," she said softly. "Instead, you spoke only about who I am." Lucas smiled as he looked toward the moon reflected across the still water. "Because even if no ancient blessing had ever existed, I would still have chosen to stand beside you." Abigail reached for his hand, her heart lighter than it had ever been before. She finally understood that the greatest promise Lucas had given her was not protection from danger. It was the certainty that she would never again have to prove she deserved love, belonging, or a place to call home, because in his eyes she had already become family long before destiny revealed its quiet truth. Autumn arrived with clear skies, golden leaves, and cool evenings that painted Blackwood Castle in warm shades of amber and silver. Nearly a year had passed since King Lucas Ashford first carried an unconscious stranger through the castle gates, never imagining how completely one quiet act of compassion would reshape his life and the future of his kingdom. The royal courtyard had been transformed for a celebration unlike any before. White flowers lined every stone pathway, hundreds of lanterns glowed beneath the open sky, and families from every village gathered beside nobles, healers, and council members without distinction. There was no feeling of distance between ruler and people that evening. Instead, the entire kingdom stood together as one community, united by gratitude rather than ceremony alone. Abigail Hayes walked slowly across the courtyard wearing an elegant ivory gown with her familiar silver moon pendant resting gently above her heart. She paused for a brief moment to look toward the ancient forest visible beyond the castle walls. Although many memories from her life before the snow never fully returned, she no longer viewed that loss with sadness. The future she had built through kindness, courage, and freely chosen love had become more precious than any forgotten past. Lucas waited at the center of the courtyard, not upon the royal platform, but among his people, exactly where he wished to stand. As Abigail reached him, he smiled with the same quiet warmth that had greeted her every morning since she first opened her eyes inside the castle. He gently took her hands in his before turning toward the gathered crowd. "There was a day," he began, "when I believed I was rescuing someone I had never met. Looking back now, I understand that compassion never travels in only one direction. I carried Abigail out of the forest, but she carried hope back into this kingdom." The courtyard fell into peaceful silence as every person listened. Lucas continued, his voice calm and sincere. "She reminded us that healing begins with kindness, that courage often speaks softly, and that the greatest strength any leader can possess is the willingness to care for one life without expecting anything in return. Today I stand before you not only as your Alpha King, but as a man deeply grateful for the chance to walk beside the woman who taught me those lessons." Tears of quiet joy shimmered in many eyes throughout the crowd. Abigail looked at Lucas before speaking from her heart. "When I woke inside these walls, I believed my life had been given back to me. Over time I learned something even more beautiful. A person is not defined by what they have lost, but by the love they choose to give after they begin again." She smiled gently at the families gathered around them, recognizing countless faces she had once comforted inside the infirmary or met while tending gardens and teaching children about healing herbs. Every smile returned to her carried the warmth of genuine family. Beneath the full moon, the elderly priestess stepped forward and quietly blessed their union, not as a command of destiny, but as a celebration of two hearts that had chosen each other freely every single day. As Lucas and Abigail stood hand in hand beneath the lantern light, applause echoed across the castle grounds while the first autumn leaves drifted peacefully through the cool evening air. The oldest healer smiled to himself, remembering the fragile young woman who had arrived wrapped in a snow-covered cloak and the weary king who refused to leave her bedside. Neither of them had understood where their journey would lead, yet every quiet act of patience had guided them here. Long after the music faded and the lanterns slowly dimmed, people throughout Blackwood would continue telling the story of the Alpha King who discovered that saving one life could transform an entire kingdom, and of the gentle Omega who proved that the strongest kind of love is never born from destiny alone, but from compassion, trust, and the simple choice to keep choosing one another day after day.